The Wyoming Wind tore across the desolate plains of Bitter Creek, 1885. A relentless howl that clawed at the edges of a widow's fading hope. Nora Boone, 30. Her auburn hair pinned tightly beneath a threadbare gray bonnet, gripped the reins of a splintered wagon, her brown eyes scouring the horizon for a flicker of salvation. Beside her, her children Ellie, 10, with chestnut curls spilling from a frayed scarf, and Sam, 7, his freckled face pale under a too large wool cap clutched a patched quilt, their breaths puffing white in the twilight's bite. Nora's husband, Tom, had succumbed to fever 2 winters ago, leaving her to wrestle a living from a homestead that spat out more dust than crops. The wagon rattled, laden with their last scraps: a sack of flour, a worn Bible, a rusted tin of coffee headed for Bitter Creek's market, where Nora prayed to barter for seed to defy another barren spring. The sky turned a bruised purple, snowflakes swirling like vengeful spirits, stinging Nora's wine-chapped cheeks. Ellie shivered, her small hands tugging the quilt tighter around Sam, who whispered, "Ma, we gonna make it home before the storm?" Nora forced a smile, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "We always do, Sam. Hold tight." But the truth gnawed deeper than the cold. The homestead was crumbling, their pantry bare, and winter loomed like a wolf at the door. She flicked the reins, urging the gaunt horses forward, their hooves crunching through fresh snow. The faint glow of Bitter Creek's lanterns flickered in the distance, a promise of warmth she could scarcely trust. As the wagon rounded a bend, a dark shape sprawled across the snowy trail, a man motionless, his black coat dusted white, like a raven fallen in the frost. Nora yanked the reins, her heart pounding. "Stay put," she told the children, her voice sharp, boots sinking into the snow as she stepped down. Ellie's wide brown eyes followed her while Sam clutched his wooden horse, a relic carved by Tom. The man was young, maybe 35, his rugged face framed by dark blonde hair matted with blood. A faint scar curled above his left brow, and his gray eyes, half open, gleamed with pain. A bullet wound seeped red through his torn linen shirt. Stark against the snow, a silver watch glinted in his pocket, its chain catching the fading light. Whispering wealth Nora couldn't fathom, she knelt, her calloused fingers finding a pulse weak but stubborn. "He's alive," she murmured, glancing back at Ellie's trembling lips. Every instinct screamed to leave him. Strangers brought trouble, and trouble was a luxury she couldn't afford. But Nora's heart, forged in loss, wouldn't yield. "We don't let folks die," she said, more to herself than the children. With Ellie's help, they dragged him to the wagon, his weight straining Nora's arms, his shallow breaths rasping like a broken bellows. Sam whispered, "He a bad man, Ma." Nora shook her head, her eyes fixed on the stranger's bloodied shirt. "Don't know, Sam, but he's human." The wagon groaned under the stranger's bulk as Nora drove toward their homestead. A weathered cabin hunched against a wine-scoured hill. Snow fell thicker, cloaking the world in an eerie hush. Inside, Nora laid him by the hearth, its embers spitting faint warmth. Ellie fetched a pail of water, her scarf slipping, while Sam watched the man, his small fingers tracing the wooden horse's curves. Nora cleaned the wound with a rag, her hands steady despite the fear curling in her gut. Who was he? A drifter, a robber? The silver watch, engraved with "To Wyatt, from EK," suggested money, but his calloused hands spoke of toil. As she bandaged him, his gray eyes flickered open, locking onto hers with a mix of confusion and gratitude. "Wire save me," he rasped, voice rough as gravel. Nora met his gaze, her brown eyes unwavering. "Because it's right." Outside, the wind screamed, and a sharp hoof beat echoed in the distance, deliberate like a predator stalking its mark. Nora's hand tightened on the rifle propped by the door, its cold barrel a familiar weight. The watch ticked softly, its silver chain glinting in the firelight, a riddle wrapped in danger. Somewhere in the storm, eyes were watching, and Nora sensed the past she'd buried was clawing its way back. The Wyoming storm raged outside Nora Boone's cabin, its wind screaming through the cracks of the weathered pine walls, as if the plains themselves mourned her fragile hopes. Inside, the hearth cast a flickering glow across the cramped room, its embers struggling against the cold that seeped through the floorboards. Nora, 30, her auburn hair escaping its gray bonnet in loose strands, knelt by the stranger's side, her brown eyes steady despite the dread curling in her chest. The man, Wyatt Kane, lay on a pallet of quilts, his dark blonde hair matted with sweat, his gray eyes clouded with fever. The bullet wound on his chest, bandaged with Nora's torn apron, oozed faintly, and his silver watch engraved to Wyatt. From EK, ticked softly, its chain glinting like a promise of secrets in the FIRELIGHT.LE. 10. Her chestnut curls tangled under a frayed scarf, stirred a pot of broth over the fire, her brown eyes darting to the stranger. Sam, 7, freckled and pale, clutched his wooden horse, carved by his late father, Tom, and whispered, "Ma, he gonna wake up." Nora's lips pressed thin, her hands wringing a damp rag. "He's fightin', Sam. We'll help him." But doubt not at her. Saving a stranger was one thing. Inviting his troubles into her home was another. The homestead, with its sagging roof and barren fields, was all she had left for her children, and the weight of that truth pressed heavier than the storm outside. Wyatt stirred, his voice a hoarse rasp. Silas Vane. The name slipped from his lips like a curse, and Nora froze, her breath catching. She knew that name, Silas Vane. A shadow over Bitter Creek, a man who'd swindled her neighbors' land years ago, leaving them broken. Tom had spoken of him once, his voice bitter, before fever took him. "Who's Silas?" Nora asked, leaning closer, her rag pausing on Wyatt's fevered brow. His gray eyes flickered, pained but sharp. "Crime lord, framed me, stole my ranch." His words came in gasps, each one a thread unraveling a dangerous past. "I was hunting him, got too close." The silver watch, heavy in Nora's pocket, felt like a brand now, its engraving tying Wyatt to a world she wanted no part of. Ellie set the broth down, her small hands trembling, and Sam edged closer, his wooden horse pressed to his chest. "He a cowboy, Ma, like Pa." Nora forced a smile, her heart twisting. "Maybe, Sam, but he's hurt, so we're his family for now." She spooned broth into Wyatt's mouth, his throat working weakly to swallow. The act steadied her, a tether to the mercy she'd clung to since Tom's death. But as she worked, Wyatt's murmurs grew clearer, fragments of a life, a sprawling ranch in Montana, a family lost, a deed stolen by Silas Vane. Nora's hands shook, the name stirring memories of Tom's despair over a cheated land deal, a wound that festered until his last breath. The fire popped, casting shadows that danced like specters on the walls. Ellie tucked the quilt tighter round Wyatt, her brown eyes wide with a child's mix of fear and hope. "He gonna stay, Ma?" she asked, voice small. Nora didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the window, where snow piled against the glass. The storm's howl masked another sound. Hoof beats, heavy and deliberate, circling the cabin. Nora's heart lurched, her hand darting to the rifle propped by the door. "Ellie, Sam, under the table," she whispered, her voice low but firm. The children scrambled, Sam clutching his horse, Ellie's scarf trailing behind. Nora crept to the window, her breath fogging the glass. In the swirling snow, shadows moved. 3 riders, their dusters black against the white, spurs jingling like a death knell. Silas Vane's men. She knew it in her bones. The silver watch burned in her pocket, its ticking a pulse of danger. Wyatt groaned, his hand twitching toward his empty holster, but he was too weak to rise. Nora gripped the rifle, its barrel cold against her palm, her brown eyes narrowing. "Stay down," she told the children, her voice a steel thread. The hoof beats paused, then faded, but the silence felt heavier, like a predator holding its breath. Nora turned back to Wyatt, his gray eyes meeting hers, a flicker of gratitude beneath the pain. "You don't know what you've done," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "Saved you," Nora said, her tone fierce, though fear clawed her insides. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the echo of spurs, a promise of trouble yet to come. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, and the watch's ticking seemed to count down to a reckoning Nora couldn't yet name. The Wyoming dawn broke over Bitter Creek, 1885, casting a pale, ashen light through the frost-crusted windows of Nora Boone's cabin, where the plains stretched like a frozen sea. Beyond the sagging walls, inside, The hearth's embers glowed, faintly, their warmth battling the chill that seeped through the pine planks. Nora, 30, her auburn hair loose in tangled strands, knelt by Wyatt Kane's pallet, her brown eyes tracing the lines of his fevered face. His dark blonde hair clung to his brow, and his gray eyes, clearer now, flickered with a restless fire. The bullet wound on his chest, bandaged with Nora's torn apron, no longer bled. But the silver watch in her pocket engraved to Wyatt, from EK, weighed heavier than ever, its ticking a pulse of secrets she feared to unravel. Ellie, 10, her chestnut curls spilling from a frayed scarf, stacked kindling by the fire, her brown eyes darting to Wyatt. Sam, 7, freckled and wide-eyed, sat cross-legged, clutching his wooden horse, its carved edges worn smooth by his father's hands. "Ma, he better yet?" Sam asked, his voice small but hopeful. Nora nodded, wringing a damp rag, though her heart churned with doubt. "He's fightin', Sam." Wyatt's murmurs of Silas Vane lingered in her mind, a name tied to Tom's. Ruin, a land deal gone sour, a neighbor's homestead stolen, and whispers of a man who broke men like kindling. She'd saved Wyatt from death, but his presence felt like a storm brewing inside her fragile sanctuary. Wyatt stirred, his voice stronger, rough as gravel. "Nora, my coat." "Letter." She hesitated, then reached for his blood-stiffened black coat. Draped over a chair, tucked in the lining, she found a folded paper, its edges worn, sealed with wax. Her brown eyes narrowed as she broke it open, revealing a scrawled note. "Silas Vane framed me for the Bitter Creek bank heist. Stole my family's ranch deed. Proof in my watch." Nora's breath caught, her fingers trembling. Tom had spoken of that heist, the one that crushed their hopes when creditors seized their land. Blaming his debts, Silas Vane's shadow stretched, further than she'd feared, tying her past to Wyatt's fight. "You knew Silas?" she asked, her voice low, edged with anger. Wyatt's gray eyes met hers, heavy with guilt. "I tracked him, got too close. He runs Bitter Creek's underbelly, land grabs, robberies." His words cut deep, stirring memories of Tom's despair, his voice breaking as he spoke of a swindler who'd cheated them. Nora hid the letter in her Bible, its pages worn from nightly prayers, her resolve hardening. "He hurt my Tom, too," she said, her voice a quiet blade. "If you're fightin' him, we're in this together." Ellie, overhearing, clutched the kindling tighter, her brown eyes wide with fear. "Ma, is Silas comin' for us?" Nora knelt, smoothing her daughter's curls. "Not if we're smart." Ellie. Sam, emboldened, offered Wyatt his wooden horse. "Pa made it. It's lucky." Wyatt's scarred hand closed around it, a faint smile breaking through his pain. "Thanks, kid," he rasped, his voice softening Nora's guarded heart. As dusk fell, the cabin's peace shattered. Hoofbeats thundered, closer than the night before, and the door rattled under a heavy fist. Nora shoved Ellie and Sam under the table, her rifle in hand, her brown eyes blazing. 3 men in black dusters stormed in, their spurs jingling, faces shadowed under wide-brimmed hats. The leader, a gaunt man with cold dark eyes, sneered, "Where's Kane? Silas wants him." Nora stepped forward, rifle steady, her voice cutting through the tension. "Ain't no Kane here, just a widow and her kids." The lie was bold, her heart pounding as she blocked their path to Wyatt's pallet. The leader's eyes narrowed, scanning the room, lingering on the blood-stained quilt. "Tell him Silas don't wait," he spat, tossing a coin onto the floor etched with a vulture, Silas's mark. They retreated, boots crunching snow, but their warning hung heavy in the air. Nora bolted the door, her hands shaking, and turned to Wyatt, his gray eyes sharp with resolve. "They'll be back," he said, struggling to sit. Nora pressed him down, her voice firm. "Then we'll be ready." She tucked the vulture coin beside the watch, their weight a promise of danger. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the echo of hoofbeats, and the cabin's walls seemed to close in, whispering of a fight Nora couldn't escape. The Wyoming morning broke cold over Bitter Creek, 1885, its gray light filtering through the cracked windows of Nora Boone's cabin, casting long shadows across the dirt floor. The hearth's embers sputtered, barely warming the air, where the scent of stale coffee mingled with the tang of fear. Nora, 30, Her auburn hair pulled tight under a worn gray bonnet, sat at the rough-hewn table, her brown eyes fixed on the letter hidden in her Bible. Its words Silas Vane's framing of Wyatt Kane for a bank heist, the theft of his ranch, deed burned in her mind, entwined with memories of her husband Tom's despair over a swindled land deal. Silas's vulture-etched coin, tossed by his men last night, lay beside Wyatt's silver watch. It's to Wyatt, from EK engraving glinting like a challenge in the dim light. Wyatt, 35, leaned against the wall, his dark blonde hair damp with sweat, his gray eyes sharper despite the bandage on his chest. The bullet wound had weakened him, but his voice carried a steely edge. "We take the letter to Sheriff Holt," he said, his scarred brow furrowing. "He's fair. He'll listen." Nora's hands clenched, her brown eyes flashing with anger. "Silas didn't just steal your ranch. He cheated Tom out of ours, left us to starve. I saw him ruin families ours, others in Bitter Creek. Land grabs, lies, all of it." Her voice trembled, the weight of Tom's death heavy in her chest. Wyatt's gaze softened, but he nodded. "Then we end him, Nora, together." Ellie, 10, her chestnut curls tucked under a frayed scarf, fed the fire, her brown eyes wide with worry. "Ma, what if they come back?" Sam, 7, freckled and clutching his wooden horse, added, "They're mean, Ma." Nora knelt, smoothing Ellie's scarf, her voice firm. "You're stayin' with Widow Jane next door, safe." Sam hugged his horse tighter, his small voice defiant. "I want to help." Nora's heart ached, but she shook her head. "You help by stayin' strong." Sam. She hid the coin in her pocket, its vulture emblem a cold reminder of Silas's reach. The ride to Bitter Creek was treacherous, the snowy plains stretching under a leaden sky, the wind biting through Nora's threadbare coat. Wyatt, in his tattered black coat, rode beside her, his gray eyes scanning the hills. The letter, tucked in Nora's Bible, felt like a beacon drawing danger. Bitter Creek's main street loomed, its saloon and general store dusted with snow. Townsfolk casting wary glances. Sheriff Holt, 45, grizzled with a graying beard and brown eyes, stood outside his office, his badge glinting. Nora handed him the letter, her voice steady. "Silas Vane's a thief. This proves it." Holt's brow furrowed, reading the scrawl, but his voice was gruff. "Need more than paper to take down Vane." Wyatt stepped forward, his scar catching the light. "There's proof in my watch. Get it to a judge." As they left the sheriff's office, a chill settled over Nora. Eyes watched from the saloon's shadows Silas's spies. She was sure Ellie and Sam, safe with Widow Jane, had whispered about a stranger near the homestead, his spurs jingling. Nora's hand tightened on the reins, her brown eyes sharp. The ride back was quiet, the plains to still, until a crack of gunfire shattered the silence. 3 riders burst from a snowy ridge, their black dusters flapping, revolvers flashing. "Kane," one shouted, his voice a snarl. Wyatt drew his knife, his weakened arm shaking, and shoved Nora behind a boulder. Bullets kicked up snow, one grazing Nora's arm, blood seeping through her sleeve. Nora grabbed a fallen branch, swinging it at a rider's horse, sending it rearing. Wyatt tackled another, his knife flashing, but a blow to his shoulder sent him sprawling. Nora's scream tore through the air as she dragged him to cover, her hands slick with blood, hers and his. The riders retreated, their laughter echoing, leaving a warning carved in the snow. "Vane sees all." Nora's arm throbbed, but her resolve burned hotter. "We're not done," she said, binding Wyatt's wound with her scarf. His gray eyes met hers, a flicker of admiration beneath the pain. "You're braver than most," he said, his voice low. Back at the homestead, Ellie and Sam ran to Nora, their faces pale. "We saw him," Ma man watchin', Ellie whispered. Nora clutched them close, the vulture coin heavy in her pocket. The letter was with Holt, but Silas's shadow loomed larger, his spies circling like wolves. The cabin's walls, once a refuge, now felt like a cage, and Nora knew the fight for justice was only beginning. The Wyoming dusk draped Bitter Creek in a shroud of purple. 1885. The snowy plains beyond Nora Boone's homestead glowing faintly under a sickle moon. Inside the cabin, the hearth's fire sputtered, casting jagged shadows across the pine walls, where the air hung thick with the scent of ash and fear. Nora, 30, her auburn hair loose and tangled, stood by the door, her brown eyes fierce as she gripped her rifle, its barrel cold against her bandaged arm. The graze from the ambush stung, but the vulture-etched coin in her pocket burned hotter, a token of Silas Vane's menace. Ellie, 10, her chestnut curls matted under a frayed scarf, huddled with Sam, 7, his freckled face pale, clutching his wooden horse. The letter exposing Silas's crimes was with Sheriff Holt, but Nora knew the fight was far from over. Wyatt Kane, 35, sat propped against the wall, his dark blonde hair damp, his gray eyes sharp despite the pain in his bandaged chest. The silver watch, engraved to Wyatt, from Ikea, lay in his scarred hand, its ticking a steady pulse in the tense silence. "Silas won't wait," he said, his voice rough but resolute. "He knows I'm here." Nora's gaze hardened, memories of Tom's ruin cheated by Silas's land grab fueling her resolve. "He don't scare me," she said, though her heart pounded. Ellie whispered, "Ma, what if he hurts us?" Nora knelt, smoothing Sam's cap. "I won't let him." "Ellie, you stay brave for Sam." The cabin's fragile peace shattered as hoofbeats thundered, closer than ever, shaking snow from the roof. A voice, cold as iron, cut through the wind. "Kane, you can't hide." Nora's breath caught Silas Vane himself. She shoved Ellie and Sam under the table, their small bodies trembling, and peered through the window. Silas, 40, stood in the yard, his black hair slick under a wide-brimmed hat, dark brown eyes glinting like a wolf's. His black duster billowed, a revolver gleaming at his hip, flanked by 2 men with rifles, their spurs jingling. "Come out, or we burn it down," Silas shouted, his voice a blade. Nora gripped her rifle, her brown eyes blazing. "Stay down," she hissed to the children. Wyatt struggled to his feet, his face pale, clutching his knife. "He wants me, Nora. Let me go." She shook her head, fierce. "You're family now. We fight." Before Silas could act, Nora fired a warning shot through the window, splintering the frame. The men scattered, but Silas stood firm, his laugh chilling the air. "You're bold, widow. Pity it won't save you." The yard erupted in chaos. Bullets tore through the cabin's walls, wood splintering as Nora returned fire, her shots steady despite the pain in her arm. Ellie screamed, clutching Sam, who whispered, "Mas strong, right?" Wyatt, weak but defiant, crawled to the door, his knife flashing as he tackled a gunman bursting in. The man's rifle clattered, and Wyatt's blade nicked his arm, but a second attacker aimed at Sam, cowering under the table. Wyatt lunged, shielding the boy, and a bullet grazed his shoulder, blood soaking his shirt. Nora's heart lurched. She fired, hitting the gunman's leg, sending him staggering into the snow. Hoofbeats signaled Sheriff Holt's arrival, his badge glinting under the moon as he drove Silas's men back with a shotgun blast. Silas vanished into the storm, his vulture coin glinting in the snow like a taunt. Nora rushed to Wyatt, her hands trembling as she bound his new wound with her scarf. "Why'd you do that?" she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Wyatt's gray eyes met hers, soft but firm. "Couldn't let him hurt the boy." Sam, clutching his horse, crawled out, his small hand touching Wyatt's. "You're brave, mister." As Holt secured the yard, Ellie, her brown eyes wide, picked up Wyatt's watch, dropped in the scuffle. Its back sprang open, revealing a folded map, its lines tracing a path to an abandoned mine outside Bitter Creek. "What's this, Ma?" Ellie asked. Holding it up, Nora's breath caught, recognizing Silas's vulture emblem in the corner. Wyatt's voice was faint but clear, proof of Silas's hideout. "His ledgers are their bank heist. Land grabs, all of it." Nora's resolve hardened, the map a beacon to justice for Tom, for Wyatt, for her family. The cabin's walls, scarred by bullets, stood firm, but the air hummed with danger. Silas was gone, but his shadow lingered, his escape a promise of vengeance. Nora clutched the map, her brown eyes burning with purpose, knowing the fight had just begun. Outside, the snow fell, burying the blood-stained yard, but the vulture's shadow loomed, waiting. The Wyoming dawn broke over Bitter Creek, 1885, a thin, cold light slicing through the mist that clung to the rugged hills. where jagged rocks loomed like sentinels over the snowy plains. Nora Boone, 30, her auburn hair pulled tight under a gray bonnet, rode beside Wyatt Kane, her brown eyes fierce with purpose. The map from Wyatt's silver watch, its vulture emblem stark against the worn paper, led them to an abandoned mine, Silas Vane's hideout. Nora's bandaged arm ached from the ambush, but the memory of Tom's ruin cheated by Silas's land grab burned hotter, driving her forward. Wyatt, 35, his dark blonde hair dusted with snow, rode stiffly, his gray eyes sharp despite the blood seeping through his shoulder bandage. Sheriff Holt, 45, grizzled with a graying beard and brown eyes, flanked them, his shotgun steady, his badge glinting under his duster. The mine's mouth gaped like a wound in the hillside, its timbers sagging under years of neglect. Nora clutched her rifle, the vulture coin in her pocket a cold weight, its emblem tying her to Silas's crimes. "This ends today," she said, her voice low, edged with steel. Wyatt's scarred brow furrowed, his gray eyes heavy. "Silas don't give up easy, Nora. Stay sharp." Holt nodded, his face grim. "Ledgers and there'll bury him bank heist, land grabs, all of it." Nora's heart pounded, Tom's broken voice echoing in her mind, his dreams shattered by Silas's greed. She thought of Ellie and Sam, safe with Widow Jane, their small faces pale with worry. "For Tom," she whispered, spurring her horse forward. Inside, the mine was a labyrinth of shadows, the air thick with dust and the stench of damp earth. Lanterns cast flickering light on crates stamped with Silas's vulture mark, stacked beside ledgers that detailed his crime-stolen deeds, rigged sales, blood money from the Bitter Creek heist. Nora's fingers traced the pages, her brown eyes blazing as she found Tom's name. His land listed among Silas's thefts. "You knew him," she said, turning to Wyatt, her voice trembling with rage. Before he could answer, a low laugh echoed. Through the tunnel, Silas Vane stepped from the darkness, 40, his black hair slick under a wide-brimmed hat, dark brown eyes glinting like flint. His black duster swayed, revolver gleaming, flanked by two men with rifles. "You're persistent." "Widow," Silas sneered, his voice cutting like a blade. "Tom was weak, begged me to spare his land. I didn't." Nora's rifle snapped up, her hands steady despite the fury choking her. "You killed him slow," she spat. Silas's eyes flicked to Wyatt, a cruel smile curling his lips. "And you, Kane thought you could betray me." Wyatt's gray eyes hardened, his voice low. "I was your partner once, Silas, left when I saw your rot murder, theft, ruin." The confession hit Nora like a blow, her trust wavering, but Wyatt's hand steadied her arm, his gaze pleading. "I'm macking it right, Nora." Silas's men lunged, and the mine erupted in chaos. Bullets ricocheted off stone, sparks flying as Nora fired, hitting one man's shoulder. Holt's shotgun roared, dropping another, but Silas charged Wyatt, his revolver flashing. Wyatt tackled him, knife in hand, their bodies crashing into crates, ledgers scattering. Nora's heart raced. She aimed, her shot grazing Silas's leg, sending him staggering into the shadows. "Go," Wyatt shouted, blood dripping from his shoulder as he shoved Nora toward the exit. Holt grabbed the ledgers, their weight a promise of justice, as they fled the collapsing tunnel. Dust choking the air. Outside, the snowy plains glittered under the rising sun. But Silas's laughter echoed from the mine, his escape a shadow slipping. Through the rocks, Nora clutched the ledgers, her brown eyes burning with resolve. Tom's name etched in her heart. Wyatt stumbled, his gray eyes meeting hers. Guilt and gratitude mingled. "I should have told you," he said, his voice raw. "Wasn't proud of who I was." Nora's anger softened, her hand brushing his. "You're fighting now." "That's enough." Holt nodded, the ledgers under his arm. Cecil clear Wyatt's name, maybe more. Vane's wanted now, back. At the homestead, Ellie and Sam ran to Nora, their faces lit with relief. The cabin's scarred walls stood firm, but Silas's escape hung like a storm cloud. Nora tucked the vulture coin beside Wyatt's watch, their ticking a reminder of the fight ahead. The ledgers held truth, but Silas's shadow stretched long, and Nora knew justice would demand one final stand. Spring 1886 swept over Bitter Creek. Wyoming, like a warm breath, transforming the once barren plains into a sea of emerald, where golden wildflowers danced under a sky so vast it seemed to hold every promise. Nora Boone's homestead, once a crumbling outpost against the wind, now stood proud, its fields bursting with sprouting wheat, the cabin's whitewashed walls gleaming in the morning sun. Nora, 30, stood on the porch, her auburn hair loose, catching the light like burnished copper, her brown eyes tracing the horizon with a piece she'd thought buried with Tom. The vulture-etched coin, Silas Vane's mark of ruin, rested in a locked tin box beside Wyatt Kane's silver watch. It's to Wyatt, from E.K. engraving a quiet testament to battles fought and won. Federal marshals had swept through Bitter Creek, their warrants pinning Silas to a lifetime behind bars, his ledgers exposing a web of land grabs, bank heists, and broken lives. Wyatt's name was cleared, his Montana ranch deed restored, and the shadow of Silas's crimes no longer darkened Nora's door. Wyatt, 35, leaned against a newly mended fence, his dark blonde hair glinting in the sunlight, his gray eyes softer now, though the faint scar above his brow told of harder days. His wounds, chest and shoulder, had healed, leaving only stiffness in the damp morning air. He'd offered Nora and her children, Ellie, 10, with chestnut curls, and Sam, 7, freckled and bright, a share of his wealth, a sprawling ranch in Montana's greener valleys. But Nora had chosen her homestead, its soil now rich with crops, its roots deep with memories of Tom and the life she'd fought to keep. Ellie darted through the fields, her brown eyes sparkling as she wove a crown of wildflowers, her laughter a melody against the breeze. Sam, clutching his wooden horse, a relic of his father's hands, sat beside Wyatt, mimicking his whittling strokes with a stick, his freckled face alight with pride. "You're good at this, mister," Sam said, grinning. Wyatt's smile, rare and warm, stirred Nora's heart, a reminder of the family they'd become. A letter had arrived at dawn, sealed with the marshal's stamp, its words final. Silas Vane, convicted, would rot in a federal prison, his empire of greed dismantled. Nora tucked it beside her Bible, its pages worn from prayers that had carried her through loss and fear. She stepped into the cabin, her fingers brushing the tin box where the vulture coin lay, its menace locked away. Memories of Tom's surface, his quiet strength, his broken dreams under Silas's schemes, but they no longer cut so deep. Wyatt followed her, his boots soft on the floorboards, his gray eyes steady. He drew a simple iron ring from his pocket, its edges smoothed by his calloused hands, and knelt before her. "Nora," he said, his voice low, rough with emotion, "I lost my family, my home, everything. You gave me a reason to fight, to live. Marry me. Let's build a life for you, me, the kids." Nora's brown eyes glistened, her hand brushing his scarred one. Tom's memory lingered, a gentle echo, but Wyatt's heart was her present, her future. "Yes, Wyatt," she said, her voice clear as the spring sky for us. Weeks later, they wed under a towering cottonwood, its branches heavy with green, the air humming with birdsong and the scent of wildflowers. Nora wore a cream muslin dress, a lupine flower tucked in her auburn hair, her brown eyes radiant with hope. Wyatt, in a white shirt and brown vest, his scar a badge of battles shared, held her hand, his gray eyes warm with love. Ellie scattered petals, her curls bouncing, her brown eyes bright, while Sam, his wooden horse in his pocket, carried the ring, beaming with pride. Sheriff Holt and Bitter Creek's townsfolk, once skeptical, raised tin cups, their cheers ringing. Across the plains, the homestead bloomed, its fields a testament to resilience, its walls a sanctuary forged in courage. Wyoming's frontier, with its brutal winters and hard-won justice, taught Nora that family was chosen, not just born, and truth was a fire that burned away lies. In the 1880s, land disputes shaped the West, but communities like Bitter Creek endured, rebuilding on grit and hope. If Nora and Wyatt's journey from loss to love stirred your heart, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more frontier tales. Like, comment. What would you fight to protect? Share this story of redemption.